Hello, friends. Welcome to Monday. It's 8:30 GMT, BST, and we are going to talk about the history news that has caught my eye over the last week. And indeed, most of it, all of it has been sent to me. I do need to apologise, though, because I'm aware that a lovely bunch of you did come down for this live that I had erroneously scheduled for last night. And the way I figured out that I'd erroneously scheduled it an hour-ish after it was supposed to have happened was my husband got a notification on his phone, which he went, "Are you supposed to be live right now?" And I was like, "Nope." And then I went and checked, and I was like, "Well, yeah, I said I would be." In my defense, I stream through StreamYard, and StreamYard starts their week. So when you do the scheduling, they start their week on a Sunday. So it goes Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. And apparently I need to actually go to the opticians because my vanity means that this is why I have to use my iPad down here as well, because I can't see what's on the screen. So I apologise for those of you who were waiting for me yesterday. For future reference, I'm going to be much more careful and double check everything. But for future reference, we will be going live on Mondays at 8:30 GMT or BST, and also my videos, my pre-recorded videos, go live on Fridays, and almost always I will be doing them as premieres. Now, sometimes because of where I work, I won't be able to get there for a 4 p.m. one. So if that's the case, I will schedule it for a 5 p.m. one, so that I can be in the live chat. So there may be some variation on when the Friday one goes live, but Mondays and Fridays are when I am doing the regularly scheduled stuff. If I'm doing something outside of that on this channel, then I will put it on my community tab and my other social media. So if I randomly claim to be doing the history news on a Sunday, I have made a mistake. But I'm going to double check. Oh boy, right, okay. So starting off well, the professionalism is on point, friends. Welcome. Thank you all for joining. It's love to see so many of you here. We have a whole bunch of excellent stories. I'm still testing things out, seeing how to work things, trying to get the slides as clear and as concise as possible so that we can rattle through stuff and get as many stories in as possible, because I think that's the way I want to do it. I want to try and cover as much as we possibly can. I have noticed that since sitting down to get ready for this, a bunch of other stories have come in on my email and on my Twitter. So that is going to be in next week's live stream. I have received so many suggestions for news articles from people. I am very grateful. Before we kick off, I do have to do now apparently a disclaimer. There is in our History News Live no drinking game portion at any point. This is not the time to be doing shots. Nothing. There's never going to be a history news bingo, because I fear that your livers will try and climb out of your bottom holes. So absolutely none of that. I do, of course, also have to say thank you. So I'm going to whack up the first of the slideshows. I have 2 slideshows. These are individuals who have sent me news articles. As per usual, they will be listed in the description box. And this time I have numbered the slides to connect to what they sit with in the description box. So if it's 1 in the description box, then the slides will be numbered 1. And also it will be linked to the opera pinboard too. So you can check it out in those both places. And the opera pinboard will say who sent me which article. So my thanks go to Crazy Artist Lady, to Mary, Yvonne, Publius, Anne, another cat, Katharine, Sheri, Felem, Joseph, and Joe. And yes, Margaret George, we have got another disclaimer: no drinking games. This is a no touchy touch. In this case, though, on these ones, you can in fact Google it. For those of you who do join us for History After Dark, I'm not banning Googling. In fact, in this situation, I fully encourage it. To all of you that have sent me news articles, I'm so incredibly grateful that you take the time to reach out to me. And when you see these things, that you think of me and send them to me. So thank you all. We're going to do what we normally do. We're going to do updates, repatriations, new news and events. And yes, so there may be amid crisis, there might be some ritual purposes being mentioned today. Let's see what we find. We have an update on that house in Pompeii that we've talked about. We talked about it being reopened. We talked about new images being uncovered last week, including a rather large phallus being sported by a gentleman in a painting. But the other thing that is interesting that hit the news is that they have installed solar panels that look like Roman terracotta tiles. And I think this is really interesting. And I believe that this is a close-up of what they look like. So I would never imagine that these were solar panels. Isn't that an incredible idea? The reason for this is because the site of Pompeii requires electronics and various things that need to run on power. And rather than, as they point out here, Pompeii is an ancient site which in some spots is fully preserved. Since we needed an extensive lighting system, we could either keep consuming energy, leaving poles and cables around and disfiguring the landscape, or choose to respect it and save millions of euros. And what an incredible development. So that's really cool. I wonder what else we're going to see coming out of the Pompeii site in terms of innovation. I think this is, if they can do this, they look really like terracotta tiles. I wonder what else can be made, solar panels can be made to look like. I think we've got some really exciting stuff probably coming down the pike in the future about that. Our next update. So this relates to some stories that we've covered a couple of times about the way that LiDAR has been used and also the way they have uncovered Mayan superhighways between communities. And there is further detail on this. So we have some pictures here of what these causeways look like. We hear that they are a mixture of mud and quarry stone with several layers of limestone cement, that they likely made these elevated pathways with a process similar to the one they used to build their pyramids, creating 10 to 15 foot stone boxes, filling, stacking, leveling them off. And several of these causeways were as much as 131 or 40 meters wide, which apparently is nearly half the length of an American football field. I don't spend a lot of time on American football fields, but I'm guessing that's pretty large. Is it the same as a rugby pitch, maybe? So there is still, looking at the end of this article, there is still apparently going to be more information to come out of this site. Researchers are looking to gather more sampling and possibly locate more settlements through LiDAR technology this month to continue their research into the early Mayan civilization. We have talked about LiDAR a lot, but for those of us who are not familiar, LiDAR is an imaging technology that you can use from above, and it can get down through like tree canopy and other things to show you what is on the ground and what might be potential sites of interest for further archaeological investigation. So you can, through this, because it's aerial, you can get a view of much wider landscapes than I believe we've ever been able to do before. And what it also allows is you can then lay it over a map, and so you can pinpoint potential archaeological hotspots, and using the LiDAR you can say to people, right, go and drill down there, do a test pit or whatever else. So it's really vital technology, and pretty much every week we are seeing new discoveries and new conceptions of the past coming out of this LiDAR analysis. I'm being told that football fields are, I'm being told it in feet and meters. They sound big. To be honest, I'm not quite sure how big a rugby pitch is, so it could be the same or it could be different. Most of my sports were indoors: gymnastics, trampolining, boxing, etc. So I tend to not know much about outdoor sports because I don't like the cold. Those are my updates for now. We are going to hop into repatriations. This is from the New York Times, and it's a brilliant article that is, of course, linked. I recommend reading it. And as you can see, the title is When a Visit to the Museum Becomes an Ethical Dilemma. And it's essentially, these are conversations that we are having through this platform, discussions that we're having. And I think it's making incredibly valid points. So some of the quotations that I've pulled. For museum goers, the ethical dimensions of viewing plundered art have become impossible to ignore. Western museums are major tourist attractions, drawing travellers from around the world. But what responsibility do we bear as spectators for patronising institutions that display what critics say are stolen works? Should we be asking how these museums got their treasures? Does our conception of modern day ethnological museum need a dramatic rethink? And it goes on, as we know, there is no institution that has faced more controversy around colonial acquisitions than the British Museum, which was the first public national museum to cover all fields of knowledge when it was founded in 1753 in London. It's home to around 8 million objects, many of which were acquired during the centuries-long rule of the British Empire. And I think it is worth pointing out that while the British Museum now occupies the space it occupies and has the holdings it occupies, things like elements that are now in the Natural History Museum were, I believe, originally British Museum stock. And certainly, if you go to the British Library, you will find books that are stamped British Museum. So that lots and lots of texts that are now housed in the British Library were originally British Museum because, in essence, that was a massive research library. We have Delia, we are going to talk about the crown jewels next up, so good spot. Describing the British Museum as the world's greatest receiver of stolen property, I think is valid. It's something that John Oliver has said, that it's essentially the largest crime scene. And I don't think that is hyperbolic. I think that there's an awful lot of things that we know are contested, and at the very least discussion should be had. And I think in more significant cases, restitution and repatriation should happen. When I visited the museum recently, lines snaked around the block. The museum was thronged with visitors that had come to see its marvels of human civilization, including the Rosetta Stone, removed from Egypt by the British in 1802. Jade treasures from the Summer Palace in Beijing, sacked by the British and French forces in 1860. In their resistance to repatriation, officials often cite the British Museum Act of 1963. We've talked about that a lot. Legislation that prohibits the trustees from removing the collection except under exceptional circumstances. The law would need to be changed by Parliament. And although some restitution experts have argued that it's vague enough to give the trustees leeway, and I would say that, bearing in mind they have talked about deaccessioning things and it being legitimate if it is not in the interest of the museums to house them, if it brings the museum into disrepute. And I think, to me, that in terms of particularly the global conversation, I think that is what is starting and is ongoing, happening with this situation. The fact that the British Museum is one of the world's greatest attractions, where anyone can view in one place the achievements of human history, is one argument against repatriation. But consensus is building that such an attraction should not come at the expense of cultural plunder. Meanwhile, new projects like the Edo Museum of West African Art in Nigeria, where repatriated artworks from historical Benin will be housed, are recasting conceptions of what an ethnological museum should look like. Exactly. Define exceptional circumstances. I would say that the culture has moved on. The conversation has changed. We are increasingly part of a global community, whether the institutions like that or not. And we can have conversations in real time, like we are having right now, across countries and nations. But while we're having these conversations and while we are having empathy and knowledge, I cannot help but feel personally, that, and I think other people agree with this, when I hear craftspeople, particularly craftspeople, for whom the Benin bronzes are part of a cultural legacy that is ongoing, there are still people creating artwork in the same manner as the Benin bronzes. The fact that those incredibly skilled, talented craftspeople, art makers, are forced to look at the artwork of their generations, of their ancestors, the thing that they are still doing in photocopies of exhibition handouts, is so offensive to me. And the argument that, well, the British Museum has them all on display for whoever wants to come, whoever can afford to come, whoever can afford the airfare to get to Britain, whoever can afford the place, the hotel in London for the time it takes. I mean, yeah, the British Museum is free, but London isn't. Believe me, I live here. London is not free. And so the notion that um, it's being housed for the world, well, it's not being housed to me for the people for whom this is their cultural heritage, and these are the crafts that they are continuing. Let's continue on here. I think that the complex that's going to be happening in Benin City is going to be really incredible, and certainly it's somewhere that I would have to save up to go to. So I as it currently stands, I could go and hop up to the British Museum anytime I want and go and see the Benin bronzes. But I do think that, as with the Parthenon marbles, if you put them in the context of the land in which they stand, then you add to it. There is a kind of hermetic sealing off of the cultural landscape in which these objects were produced that I think naturally occurs when they are not in the place from which they have origin. I think that repatriating not only gives back what was stolen and does in some small way some kind of restitution in that repatriation. I think what it also does is it puts into those artifacts a historical legacy that is otherwise been stolen from them too. So it's not just the community that I think has been stolen from. I think the artifact itself has also been in some way robbed of its true understanding and of being curated in ways that are make it whole. Oh, so as you can see at the bottom of this slide, you'll see the number 3 that connects this. It'll be on all the slides. That connects to the thing that you're going to find in the description box of which these slides are. Why should anyone have to visit another country to view cultural heritage that was stolen? And that's exactly what I would the question that I would ask. It's yeah. If items are forfeited removed from their original locations, then perhaps make digital copies for 3D viewing and then send them back. I think that's this is the other thing. We are quite happy to have casts of things in museums, and they can be I've brought this up before, but Dippy, the Diplodocus, that is in the Natural History Museum and was for a long time in the main hall at the Natural History Museum, and then went on tour. It's been on tour around the country. It's come back to the Natural History Museum. Dippy is a big deal. I remember as a child, my love of dinosaurs and going and having a picture taken with Dippy and taking home a Diplodocus toy because I wanted one, having seen Dippy. Dippy is not dinosaur bones. It's a cast of dinosaur bones. I think there's about 5 or 6 Dippies in existence that are all cast. We are happy for that for decades to be front and center in one of our national museums. Happy for it. So you can't tell me that casts aren't good enough, particularly with the skill we have with 3D modeling. I don't buy it. I just simply don't buy it. Pretty pick. You can't just look at the object, but also everything around it. History does not exist in a vacuum, and I couldn't agree more. And I will own up to the fact that my own area of study and my own interest in things is material culture, it is literary history. So it is taking art and objects and trying to understand them in the context they were produced, but also how those objects, those artifacts, those texts affected society, how they can sit in between each other, they communicate. So the text is influenced by its context, or the object is influenced by its context, but also their existence, their creation influences the context, the society, and what happens afterwards. So to me, putting it in its place in space, we can't put it back in time, but putting it in its place and in space and its culture and community, even though that culture and community has moved on, I think is vital. So I'm just getting. Yes, this is the other thing. The other argument is, as well as this kind of this law thing, the argument that they are starting to talk about less, but you occasionally see it come up. It's talked about a lot less because of how distasteful it is that, well, we have to keep them in our museums because we can't trust those people, though whoever those people are, we can't trust them with their stuff because, you know, they might not protect it. They might destroy it. Yeah, patronizing and paternalistic is the word that I would use. And also, like, who are you talking about? Who are you talking about when you say that? So lots of people. So you're saying Pretty Pick live in LA, and that all the skeletons in the La Breja tar pits museum, I'm not familiar with that, are casts. They even sent it to the museum. And also, I think that, considering my personal belief about exhibiting human remains, casts, I think, are perhaps a middle ground, although at the same time, like, do we need to do that as well? We shall see. The Sue the T-Rex at the Field Museum is a cast. Her real skull is upstairs in. There we go. Same thing. Like so many. So that it's quite rare, to my understanding, to find full skeletons of dinosaurs. So even if they aren't full casts, there will be cast portions. So bits of missing bones, particularly if you want them standing up. Bits of missing bones, bits of this, that, or the other will have to be cast to make a skeleton whole. So it's, to my understanding, very rare to have or maybe there isn't one, I'm not sure, but very rare to have a complete skeleton of a dinosaur that has no cast features in it. So we're quite happy to accept that. We are quite happy for that to be part of our heritage and national story. So why not this? We mentioned crown jewels. Here we go. Monarchy and museum ethics, the darker side of what's on display. And quite right. In the aftermath of the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, there were increasingly conversations about what it means for those who are in colonies, ex-colonies, the Commonwealth, what it means to those people, the death of the Queen and what comes next. This quote says, there's been long-standing criticism worldwide over how the monarchy continues to reap the benefits of the British Empire's colonisation of African, Asian and Caribbean countries and diasporas. The empire violently exploited such nations, leading to decades of socioeconomic devastation and suffering. In the past few years, public scrutiny and accusations of racism perpetuated within the royal family have forced them to reckon with their colonial history. Oh, just 1 second, doing it ourselves. You're quite right. No real dinosaur bones actually exist. I should have said fossils. So some of them, so technically, they're all casts, but some are naturally occurring casts made of water going into bone and ossifying into stone. No, ossifying is making it bone. Whatever makes stonifying. I'm going to make up a word there. So yes, no real dinosaurs' bones do exist. That is completely correct. They are, but in some fossilized remains, they aren't all fossils. They're casts. That was confusing. Where are we? So In the past few years, public scrutiny and accusations of racism perpetuated in the royal family have forced them to reckon with their cultural history. Absolutely can't disagree with it. More recently, though, through the passing of the Queen, has reignited debates about reparations and the legacy of colonialism. Those who believe the riches stolen by the empire under imperialism should be repatriated have taken advantage, it's a weird choice of it, of the media hubbub, also weird choice of words, to voice their opinions on such platforms as Twitter. Am I being really pernickety to make that sort of feels dismissive of what is actually a really important conversation? Am I being pernickety? Okay, for example, the famed Kohinoor diamond began trending as a hashtag on Indian Twitter shortly after the Queen's death. I want to point out that there has been long conversations about the Kohinoor, and yeah, the passing of the Queen has certainly ramped it up. But it's not like those conversations just were like, oh, hang on a second, this thing exists. Like it's been a conversation for a while. Okay. So quite right. The United Kingdom and other former colonial powers face tough decisions over what to do next in terms of legislation regarding museum ethics. And here's the thing. Another frequent argument that's made is like, well, the British did this and it was really bad, but other people are doing worse. Okay, but it doesn't have to be a race to the bottom. I don't love what France does in some of its colonies. I don't love that there are in French colonies, there are, for example, in certain ones, no medical schools, so they export trainee doctors from big France to there so they can do their training. And they get paid a fortune, and then they come back. And so individuals in that colonized area, are essentially being trained on constantly. So look, we're all doing bad stuff, but I can't comment really on what's happening there because I don't vote for those people. But I do vote for these people, and I can have a conversation about how I think that at the very least we should stop continuously referring to the Kohinoor as a gift. That would be one step in the correct direction, I think. This is a turbulent time for its royal family, which has recently suffered a major loss. And I cannot imagine what it must be like to have lost a mother that's also a queen and your boss. It's very odd, I'm sure. But I don't think that exempts an institution. The individuals of the royal family get grace from me, but the institution of monarchy has to face up to some of these unpleasant parts of it. If I'm going to ask the British Museum to do it, I expect the monarchy to do it too. The royal family are people. The monarchy is an institution, and it is a multi-million-pound business. Let's call it what it is. So we'll see. I think it's the right choice for Camilla to not wear a crown with the Kohinoor in it. It doesn't stop the conversation. It just means that it's not completely pressing right now. There's other stuff that needs to be talked about. Why does the monarchy need shed falls of ridiculous bling? Because magnificence. That's always the way it's been. There is, I think, something about shiny that distracts, or is intended to distract. I'm just seeing some great comments going on. I'm sorry I can't pick everything up. Just on the diamond, I should have mentioned it. So we're talking about the Kohinoor diamond. Yes, the Kohinoor was the last Maharaja of the Sikh Punjab, was a child. And when the British encountered him, my understanding is they imprisoned his mother. And essentially part of it was that he then said, oh, Victoria's my empress, here, have a diamond. And so that's how they framed it, as a gift. But I don't think a small boy whose mother has been imprisoned is in a particular position to say no to anything. And then the Kohinoor is brought back. It features as part of the Great Exhibition, and the story goes that either Victoria or Albert, or maybe both, weren't particularly pleased with the response that Kohinoor got. They thought that it would get this sort of rapturous, look at this massive diamond, isn't it glorious? They didn't like the lack of awe. This why so many shiny pretty things. They were displeased with the lack of awe, so they recut it. So they chopped it up a bit, which is also doubling down. And the last Maharaja's daughter was Victoria's goddaughter, Princess Sophia Duleep Singh, and she was also involved in an attempt to get votes for women. So it's a very interesting family, but still does make the Kohinoor a gift. The other question is, where does it go back to if it's returned? Absolutely no idea. Excellent question. Absolutely no clue. But I tell you what does need to happen for us to figure that out. A conversation needs to be started. As it currently stands, the people that could have that conversation are refusing to. And I think with some conversation, a discussion could be had that could reach a conclusion that might make lots of people happier, perhaps. We've seen this lady before. So we have the New York Antiquities Trafficking Unit, our two favourites. So Matthew Bogdanos is also now hopping up on my level of heroes. We are going after this Shelby White and her collections. The crusading New York prosecutor, who has been exposing illicit trafficking in the antiquities market through a succession of high-profile raids, has zeroed in on his next big target: the private collection of Shelby White, widow of a Wall Street legend and philanthropist known for donating to Jewish museums in New York and to the Israeli government agency who is charged with policing antiquities trade. The reason for the references to the connections with Israel is because this is an Israeli publication. So that's why it's focusing on that, just to flag that up. As a result of the ongoing investigation into looted artifacts by the Manhattan District Attorney, Matthew Bogdanos, hero, White has already relinquished at least 24 items worth at least $20 million. We have talked about that previously. Some of those artifacts have been returned to Italy and Turkey in recent months. A request for comment submitted to the charity headed by White received no reply. And then we've got our boy, we've got our favourite, Alvin L. Bragg Jr. Oh, he's just my hero. Manhattan District Attorney Alvin L. Bragg. In my mind, he's like a superhero. I need to look at a picture of him. He just sounds incredible. And he thanked White in a February 3rd press release for cooperation with investigators. White serves as the chair of the American charity Friends of Israel Antiquities Authority. This charity funnels tax-exempt donations to an Israeli government office and law enforcement agency that sponsors archaeological excavation and regulates the buying and selling of antiquities. Is that all okay? Is there shade in that? Is there shade in that statement? I don't really understand tax exemptions and whether there's, by mentioning it, is that a pointed mention? Or is that just a thing? I don't know. White has donated directly to the IAA through her family's charity, Leon Levy Foundation, named in honour of her late husband. Last June, the authority unveiled the Shelby White and Leon Levy Mosaic Archaeological Centre near Israel's Ben Gurion Airport. Many Jewish cultural institutions in New York have benefited from White's donations. She is director of the Center of Jewish History, which thanked her in 2010 for an $860,000 gift that helps with the preservation of archival materials. So look, on the one hand, there's potentially some looted artifacts. On the other, she is seemingly using her money to preserve things. Although, does tax exemption, does that mean that she pays less tax because I have no idea how money works. So I have an accountant who FYI is also my dad. I don't know what this means. Does that mean that she... Oh, is it? Okay. Definitely pointing out the hypocrisy. Okay. I can't... I'm having trouble. I was having trouble parsing what that meant. I felt like it was maybe supposed to be shady, but I wasn't 100% sure if it was, but it felt like it was a pointed thing. Although some charities have tax exempt status, it's a tax write-off that can be taken for. So this could be a tax write-off for her by... Okay, all right. I think I see that there's an element of shade. It's a bit shady. Okay. The Queen Consort's crown will contain, it seems, Cullinan 3 through 5. Do you know what? I need to look into the Cullinan. I know it. I mean, what I know is that it was mined. I know that it was cut into 3 pieces and it was traveled over in a hat box. That's pretty much all I know, but I need to check out. Ultimately, mineral mining, diamond mining, precious metal mining, etc., has frequently had some very shady and complicated things. So I am going to check that out. Was it a biscuit tin, the Cullinan? I see. I thought it came in a hat box. Interesting. Was there something involving a hat box and another diamond? Because somebody brought something in a hat box, I think. Anyway, let's and we're mentioning Hobby Lobby. They seem to have a lot of books, lots of books that were very looty. We've talked about them in the past and their kind of looty ways. There's some allegedly, don't sue me, allegedly looty. Okay, we are talking about the law. We mentioned it in the previous article. This is the law that is prohibiting the repatriation of art. 60-year-old law. Is it about to change? We have discussed whether or not government could change the law. Let's also remember that the British Museum is the one who is crying the most about this legal prohibition. And the guy who was sitting at the tippy top of that museum knows all these people because he was an MP and he's friends with all of them. He has been in the House of Commons bar getting absolutely sloshed on drink that I'm allegedly, I wasn't there, but food and drink is so heavily subsidised in the House of Commons. It is in a cost of living crisis when they were last year discussing whether or not they should give the most disadvantaged children food through the summer. The subsidisation of their food makes me want to unzip my skin and climb out. Okay, anyway, let's continue. The loophole. If they don't change the law, there is a loophole. That is the Charities Act 2022, which enforces amendments to the previous act in 2011. A provision of this act would allow for charities, including national museums like the British Museum, to return objects if trustees feel a moral obligation to do so and gain approval from either the UK courts, Charity Commission, or Attorney General. There was quite a bit of excitement last year, said Petra Warrington, a London-based attorney specialising in art and cultural property. It wasn't ever going to mean that trustees just hand objects over easily, and nor should they be able to. There should be oversight. But it was going to possibly open a route where there were very strong moral considerations. The Act's provision was supposed to take effect in October, but the British government has delayed it to consider its implications. It's possible they hold it back indefinitely because they don't like the consequences of the change. The Charities Act 2022 is most likely an opportunity for an amendment to the museum's repatriation policy in the foreseeable future, unless there is a sudden drastic change in government policy, he said. I couldn't imagine in the current environment any other proposed change to the British Museum Act. Unsurprisingly, the British Museum did not respond to requests for comment. So let's squick over to the Parthenon marbles, and this is from a Greek publication. They are talking because there was a discussion of perhaps this is a long-term loan. If a loan is what's on offer, then Greece cannot accept it. Alone would mean that the British Museum does not only possess the marbles, but also owns them. A beautiful illustration of the legal slogan, possession is 9/10 of the law. If you possess them, you own them. But Greece does not recognise what the museum does not have, ownership. The museum has 9/10 of the law. It's a well-written article. It has possession, and the museum knows that. An offer of a loan is a bait with consequences for the Greek claim under international law, and the Greeks are right to beware of the British Museum bearing gifts. Wow. Wow. I mean, not wrong. A loan is not repatriation, and it does not deal with the underlying matter of ownership. A practical detail remains a thorny issue of possible conflict between the government and the museum. How should the marbles be repatriated? Should national museums have the right to deaccession their items in their collections on legal or moral grounds? We're talking about this. In October last year, the government decided to delay the entry into force of two provisions of the Charities Act 2022 that would allow national museums, subject to statutory bans on deaccessioning, including the British Museum, to remove items from their collections on moral grounds. Should the museum return them, or should Parliament pass an act transferring them to Athens? From a legal viewpoint, I'd much rather the UK government pass an act transferring the marbles to Greece. An act vested their curation in the British Museum. An act can send them back home. But better while it is still the magnanimous thing to do, with pomp, history will remember. And that is something that I think these repatriations, at a certain point, the conversation is going this way. The national conversation is happening. The global conversation is happening. Other nations are moving forward with repatriations, with deaccessioning. It is happening. And some English and British institutions are following suit. They are, of course, not our national ones. These national museums being held behind means they are not at the cutting edge of these conversations. And when it comes to things like heritage, when you are dealing in the past, if you are not forward facing in the ways in which you have your conversations and the way you treat your artifacts, if you don't keep in step with the way that these conversations are moving, then your relevance, the thing that sits in place for the argument for the funding you receive, that you are relevant to your communities, that you add value, that relevance starts to slip away. When it becomes uncomfortable for people to visit there, the museum itself starts to lose its position within our society. Would be the way I see it. And I absolutely agree with this. I wish they would display replicas fully painted, like that exhibition that they had, the Chroma exhibition that's in the States, that I think is fabulous. I also think this is one of these things that people are going to look back on and be like, this was a no bueno. This was another no bueno. I agree. So we have an ancient seal manufactured in the ancient Greek city of Asine, which is Peloponnese, 4,000 years ago. It was returned on Wednesday after more than a century. It was returned by the Swedish embassy in Athens. They handed it over to the cultural minister, Lena Mendoni. In 1922, half this seal ended up in Sweden and half stayed in Greece. So they have been able to reconnect these two parts of the seal. This fragment of clay seal was found during an archaeological dig that was initiated by the then Crown Prince of Sweden, Gustav Adolf, later King Gustav VI Adolf. It was in the possession of the Uppsala University Museum in Sweden, but the Swedish government decided to grant permission for it to be given to the Archaeological Museum of Nafplon. Mendoni thanks the Swedish ambassador and said that the return of the artifact proves the excellent relations between the two countries. Speaking out about the seal, she said the reunification of the two parts and the artifact had a very significant meaning. Two parts of a small artifact are united in the land that created them in Greece. So it's at a certain point, I would just love it if a little bit we could get on the right side of history. Just I would like that. That would be. Also, I think it's right to repatriate, but on a personal level, it would feel good. The Musée d'Orsay has been ordered to restitute paintings by Renoir, Cézanne, and Gauguin, which were stolen during World War II. 4 major works by Renoir, Cézanne, and Gauguin, which were stolen during World War II, to the heirs of a prominent 20th century French art dealer, Ambroise Vollard. We have this is a 10 years in the making victory for Vollard's heirs. In 2013, they requested the restitution of 7 works allegedly stolen by experts from the dealer's estate following his sudden death in 1939 at 73. The experts charged with assessing the 6,000 works of post-impressionist 6,000 works. Whoo! Okay. 6,000 works of post-impressionist modern art accrued over Vollard's storied career. Instead, they sold several paintings to German museums, art dealers, or members of the Nazi Party. And then in May 2022, a court agreed that 4 paintings were stolen, and this decision was then upheld last November by a French High Court. However, these circumstances are complicated in terms of the restitution. Vollard was a seismic force in the Paris art dealing from the 1890s to 1930s. He gave Cézanne his first solo exhibition, Picasso his first Paris show, and Matisse his first show anywhere. Wowee. His prodigious collection, which included some of the most expensive names in art history, was willed to his siblings, inciting fierce family feuding over how to split the holdings. In the decade since his death, the Vollard collection has been dispersed to museums and private collections worldwide, broadening the legal battle waged by his heirs over the return. In 2012, they sued the Serbian government over 429 pieces that are housed at the National Museum in Belgrade, a case that is still ongoing. Let's see some comments. Dare I mention the loot the Vatican has? I mean, fair. I would like Henry VIII's letters. They should be here. But that is, there are conversations there. I'm sorry you're finding it difficult to do the video and the chat. What I will say is that, to my knowledge, the live chat, Melissa, will still be there in the playback. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's still available. I set it to be available anyway, and I hope it should be. 6,000 works, a very busy boy, a very rich boy too, clearly. Clearly a very rich boy. Yeah, let's talk about the Vatican archives. Absolutely. That's a lovely way of putting it. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. That Wheezy Squeeze box, you are a optimist, and I needed that, so thank you. I agree. Conversation is everything. Look, I was doing these as pre-recorded videos first Friday of the month, and this is obviously only our second month of trying it out as live streams. I'm still very much getting into the swing of things and figuring out how to do this, but I'm really enjoying doing it this way. And for you that are here, I hope you're enjoying it too. You do seem to keep coming in, so I'm hoping that is the case, and I'm glad that you're enjoying the conversation. And I also need the social interaction, so I'm very pleased the live stream is working out. These things are never going to be perfect. We're gonna do our best to motor through. Right. The Queen was shown some of the letters during a visit to the Vatican many years ago, but I think it's a sore subject for the Catholic Church. I mean, she should have put them in her purse. It was big enough. I mean, steal them back. Why not? Steal them back. The thing is, I'm under the impression that some things in the Vatican you just don't get to know about. Like they just don't let you. They don't let you know they even exist. Which I suppose it's their collection, but I feel like that we should have conversations about that. Yeah, let's. Do you know what? Let's roll that dice. See what happens. Let's see what happens if we roll that dice, Marilyn. Why not? Let's light the match. Let's go. Throw the grenade. Let's do it. Okay, hopping on. Now this is cool. There's a couple of Indigenous stories coming up. So I think this is pronounced Haudenosaunee Confederacy has received sacred objects from a Geneva museum. These objects are so sacred, that is why they have not been photographed in this article. They have been kept in boxes. This confederacy includes a collection of Indigenous nations that live on both sides of the US and Canada border. And what they have got returned from Geneva is a medicine mask and a turtle rattle. In 1995, this council issued a policy statement on medicine masks. So this council, this collective, banning their use for commercial purposes and public exhibition, including photographing them. It called for the return of all masks from private collectors, museums, galleries, universities, and other institutions. We've had hundreds, if not thousands, returned already, but I know there is still just as much out there. That may be a bit small, so it's too small for me. The mask and turtle rattle that have been repatriated were donated to this Geneva museum by the Swiss historian and politician Amédée Pierre-Jules pt.3, and it was donated in 1825. We don't know how it came into his possession. So it's the Haudenosaunee. I'm reading a whatever that is. Not etymology. Brain is going click, click, click. Thank you. Haudenosaunee. Haudenosaunee. Thank you very much. Haudenosaunee. After it was contacted, this museum quickly removed the mask and rattle from display. A ceremony was held, and they were safely tucked into storage, so immediately taken off display until the official request for repatriation was made. The management of the MEG and the City of Geneva's Department of Culture Digital Transition quickly approved the handing over of the objects. From start to finish, phonetic, thank you, etymological, wow. From start to finish, the process took 7 months. 7 months to be returned to Canada. From start, just let's let that sink in for a second. From start to finish, the process took 7 months for the items to be returned to Canada. Both Ferguson and Deere said the museum and city's swift response and cooperation is an example other institutions should follow. Here. It highlighted to me that when you're dealing with people that are respectful, how easy it can be. These sacred items are now back, and the delegation has said they can be returned to ceremonial use. These medicine masks are essentially seen as being kin, is my understanding. Like they are almost semi-living things that require treatment in that way, and they have immense spiritual wealth. Another repatriation along a similar line, this a totem. I believe this may be an update. I believe we talked about this. There was certainly a poll that came out of a Victoria museum, and I think this may be the same one. If not, then it's a different museum in the same place doing another repatriation. So members of the Nuksulk Nation gathered outside the Royal British Columbia Museum in downtown Victoria to greet one of their totem poles. Some members drummed and sang. One woman walked through the crowd, smudging, while others stood with their eyes fixed on the top of the building as a crane extracted the pole through a hole made especially for the removal. They cheered as the pole, which was just over 5 meters high and a meter wide, was lowered to the ground. So the women were singing, reawaking the pole, touching it with handfuls of small feathers. And we can see on this map the convoy of escorts as where it was taken from the museum back to where it's going to go. So it's a more than 1,000 kilometer trip from the island to the mainland and up through the interior, and expected to take 2 to 3 days, depending on weather conditions. This pole, according to the hereditary chief, this pole was carved by his great-grandfather. In the 19th or 20th century, that's when it was carved, and it was placed outside the family's long house in Talomi, which is South Bentic, I believe that's how it's pronounced. It was lost in the early 1900s when Nooksack members seeking to evade the smallpox epidemic relocated 35 kilometers north to Belacola. So we're having a discussion. This is one stolen by the... There we go. This is the one stolen in the smallpox epidemic. Just any excuse, to just get in there, nab it. Yeah, we're talking. I mean, I think I mentioned that I think these medicine masks and Benin bronzes. I don't believe that Benin bronzes have the same spiritual component, but you're absolutely right. As I was saying at the start, the fact that people are still producing works like this and these culturally significant works, and they are reliant on word of mouth, oral history, because they don't have the original objects to examine. Not acceptable. Not acceptable. Let's have a conversation about all of the supposed artifacts found in the ground. What? Okay, I need to look into that. That's never heard of that in my life. I've heard some sort of things about Mount Rushmore, and I was aware that it was a sacred mountain. Yeah, there's been some shenanigans happening, isn't there? Oh dear. Oh dear. Right, I need to swap out my little this. So we're going to swap out my, because we are now moving on to the new news, and I need to pull up my new news little board so that I can see what I'm doing. Let's open you up. Lovely. Right. Now, this is a open access journal that I would recommend if you have the scientific mind to read everything. It's well worth a look. I don't understand what all of the words mean, but what it seems to be saying is that they have got an ankylosaur larynx, and I'm assuming that they have molded it, and they have figured out that how the larynx would have produced sound, and that it would have done a bird-like vocalization in non-avian dinosaurs. So in my time working at the Natural History Museum in London, as I was front of house, and I would also do things like the sleepovers. And as part of the sleepovers, when a bunch of kids would come in and we'd do a night in the museum, it was super fun. I got to meet people, the scientists that were there, and the conversation about how did dinosaurs sound, they were talking about the fact they probably sounded like birds, depending on their size, that rather than being like a raw situation, that it was more of a bird situation. And seemingly this modelling is showing that to potentially be the case. Interesting, right? We have a reconstruction revealing, this is a sad one, and I think maybe it's sad, I don't know. Lonely boy with a deformed skull who died in a cave in Norway 8,300 years ago. They found a teenage boy with an unusual skull and short stature, and potentially he was carrying a fishing rod. He was found in this cave. He was 15 years old, about 4'1", which is small for his age, even by Mesolithic standards. He has a condition that essentially his skull fused too early, so it had to grow backwards rather than sideways. And they think the article does show what his remains were like in situ, but as I've discussed, I don't show human remains on this channel. So if you would like to see what that looked like, but he is kind of, his head sort of resting on the cave wall. but I'm not going to show it. But you're free to go and check out the article. So they have found this, and they have then reconstructed the skull, and what he's holding here in this, they've got his full form here, and he's holding this fishing rod, and the fishing hook that he's holding is also based on something from the time. So it's a reconstruction of a replica of one of these findings. We are also told the sheer volume of animal remains found at this site also attests to a plentiful food supply. This cave, which is about 30 feet or deep and 16 meters wide, is filled with kitchen waste, ornaments such as decorated bone pendants and fishing tools, including hooks, harpoons, and barbed bone points, suggesting that ancient people lived, worked, cooked, and slept at the Vist site. So he is found in a position that looks like he's just kind of fallen asleep and passed away, but it doesn't necessarily mean that he died lonely. I don't like to think so, but then that's because I'm a sentimentalist. It's interesting to see how disabled people have always existed throughout history. It really proves how we were always here. I mean, absolutely. And there is some really interesting work being done in disability history that I think there's going to be some cool work coming out in the next few years, and rightly so. I am not sure if the scaphocephaly, which is the condition, is a genetic condition or not. I didn't see in the article whether they thought this was a genetic condition. It's possible that it exists in another article. I would assume they don't talk about DNA testing. I don't know if there would be sufficient DNA to look for genetic abnormalities, but I will, if I see an update, I will be sure to let you know. Absolutely. Absolutely. And also the idea, I think, for me, a massively telling factor of that is the notion before we found the king in the car park. I say we, I wasn't there. Before they found the king in the car park, one of the statements that was used to say that Richard III could not possibly have had any kind of spinal difference was that he would not have been able to do the things that were required of him as a medieval warrior, duke, and then prince, and then king. That somebody who had that level of deformity wouldn't be capable of swinging a sword. Right. So they find the king in the car park, and he has an obviously scoliosis spine. And what they do find, and maybe people have seen this, what they do also find is somebody who has a modern day person who has a very similar scoliosis spine. And to my understanding, this person had found it quite difficult to stay in work because his difference was not being accommodated, and it essentially he was in constant pain. And when they put him on a modern day horse in a modern day saddle and they asked him to swing a sword, he was in agony, just agony. And they were like, oh my goodness. So if this is Richard III, then is all of the stuff about him fighting a lie? Well, then they made bespoke armor as Richard III would have had. And then they put him on a medieval saddle, which has a high back and a high front. And all of a sudden, all of those issues of riding a horse and swinging a sword didn't matter anymore. Like, it was still an unusual physicality, but so he was, muscle aches. But anybody who sits on a horse for the first time and swings a sword for the first time is going to have problems with their muscles. But it just goes to show that when you are making things bespoke for people, and when you are essentially not following a medical model of disability, when you're recognizing that disability is a social factor, that it's not, a person is not disabled by their body, they're disabled by the fact that society does not accommodate what their body needs. Yeah. And in the past, I think there were certainly examples of people being better with accommodating people who were different. Maybe we can learn something. But we like to look back, people like to look back on the past as being, nasty, brutal and short, but it was still communities, wasn't it? This is an interesting article. I recommend checking out the full thing. It's, of course, going to be linked. And the question of navigating the ethics of ancient DNA research. If we're going to have those questions, if we're going to look at these remains, who has the right? Who has the right to approve them to be studied? Who has the right to dig them up? Who has the right to do that study and to also interpret it? So I recommend having a look at this article. I think it's really interesting. And yeah, so check it out. We have the discovery of a lost Bronze Age culture. So this culture is around 2300 to 1600 BC, and it's a very complicated spelling. I'm going to call it Untis culture. I apologize if I butchered that, but I don't necessarily know what all of those markers mean for the letters in them. This culture is distinguished by its characteristic metal object, including ingot torques, flat axes, flat triangular daggers, bracelets with spiral ends, I think we've seen those, and disc and paddle-headed pins and curl rings. And it's distributed over a wide area of Central Europe and beyond. This settlement is situated on an island promontory. 4,000 years ago, there was a lake, and today there's a flowering meadow. The settlement occupied an area of 3.7 acres and supported a population of about 100 people. And the research suggests that it was a metallurgical centre and a stronghold of power within the northern reaches of this culture. The results of this study, which were published in the Journal of Archaeological Science Reports, reveals that the settlement was discovered after a geoarchaeological analysis of the former lake, which was formed when a glacier retreated around 18,000 years ago. Based on core samples obtained by drilling, the lake started to shrink around 800 BCE, eventually turning into a large bog at the turn of the era. And so we have a quote: during field research in the central part of the former lake, we noticed an elongated hill. At its top, there were numerous molehills with vast monuments, mainly broken fragments of prehistoric vessels. It was quite a surprising discovery, considering that in prehistory, this settlement would have been at the centre of a lake. A sip, and we continue on. So we have a team of researchers from the University of Malaga and the University of Jaén who believe they have discovered Egypt's oldest tomb, and it was orientated towards the winter solstice sunrise. It's located at the necropolis at Aswan in southwestern Egypt, which is on the western side of the Nile. And it's believed that this tomb dates to the end of the 12th dynasty, which is the reign of Pharaoh Saronset the third, or Amenemhet the third. It's orientated so that the sunrise on the winter solstice would shine through the doorway and down a corridor towards a chapel, where a niche would have held a statue of the tomb's occupant, most likely a provincial governor. So that's really interesting. The chapel, to allow the greatest amount of sunlight to reach the chapel, the tomb's doorway stood around 16 feet tall and was always open. We found no trace of a door. It's clear this entrance was made to receive the sun's rays. According to Lola Doyaz, a professor of architecture at the University of Malaga, the tomb was actually angled 0.74 degrees south of a precise orientation towards the winter sunrise, and it appears to have been done intentionally so that the brightest star in the sky, Sophis, now known as Sirius, would be visible from the tomb's niche on the summer solstice. The summer solstice generally coincided with the beginning of the annual Nile flood, which was key to Egypt's agricultural success. As such, both the summer and the winter solstice were associated with resurrection. The architect or designer of the tomb was a genius and also showed great imagination in combining these two celestial events in a single monument. Isn't that fascinating? Brilliant. We've got another Egypt find. 3,500-year-old tombs of 2 royal officials have been opened in Egypt, and I recommend checking out the article for this because I couldn't share all of the pictures. I didn't know which ones to pick. There are incredible pictures of things that have been found. The people in this tomb are Djibouti and Sheri, who both lived during a period of transition in ancient Egypt. They served the pharaoh at the start of a period now referred to as the New Kingdom. Around the 3,500-year-old tombs, the archaeologists unearthed numerous other coffins, jewellery, artefacts, and this is also been chronicled on the Project 3, check that spelling, on its Instagram account. And this has happened at Luxor, which is about 400 miles southeast of Cairo. Reminds me of the Newgrange tomb in Ireland. I am not familiar, but I've put that up on the screen so that I can go and check it out. Thank you very much, Shane. Egypt does have its own museum coming, and it's going to be opening allegedly later this year. So yeah, there's going to be a whole big, and I think that's one of the reasons why we are hearing so much about these finds is because they have this incredible new museum to put it in that's opening soon. I believe. I will double check when. I'm assuming that all artifacts found in Egypt remain in Egypt. Now, I believe that is the legal requirement, and the culture ministry in Egypt, to my understanding, is very hot on it. Of course, that doesn't stop people potentially looting. Egypt is a big place, and if people want to sneak open, is it already opened? If people want to sneak in and try and rob stuff, they can. But I think, yes, it's supposed to all stay there. They just opened the new museum, did they? Interesting. No, I said, Troy, I said I was not familiar with Newgrange. I don't know what Newgrange is. I'm going to have to check it out. And I will also have to check out, I thought the museum was opening later this year, but I will definitely have to add it into next week's as a place to go and see. Fabulous. Excellent, excellent. We have a 2,200-year-old flushing toilet, the oldest to ever be found unearthed at palace ruins in China. This was announced this month. The Yuanyang's city site uses capital city under multiple ancient Chinese dynasties. And while excavating one of these buildings, they stumbled upon a toilet. They found part of an indoor toilet with a seat and a pipe leading towards an outdoor sewage pit. The upper portion of the toilet is missing. Reconstructing the toilet, researchers realized that it was deceptively advanced water flushing system, similar to modern flushing toilets. And we have this reconstruction. This is the first and only flush toilet to ever be unearthed in China, and everybody at the site was surprised and then all burst into laughter. I mean, archaeologists clearly have an interesting sense of humor. A toilet. It's apparently between 2,200 years old and 2,400 years old. Its exact age is unknown because these palace buildings were used for centuries. This is the oldest flush toilet ever found, with the invention of flush toilets being previously dated, unsurprisingly, to 16th century in England. And they are, of course, referring, I believe, to the Harrington water closet, which was designed as a joke. So John Harrington was Queen Elizabeth's naughty godson, and to try and please his queen, he created a cistern-based flushing toilet that I don't believe gave out into a sewer, but it did, and it didn't have or if it did, it didn't have a U-bend, so it wouldn't have prevented any smell. It didn't catch on because it would flush, it could work, but it never caught on because when you're Queen of England, as Elizabeth was, you don't go to the toilet comes to you. and then somebody else deals with your excrement and puts it away. That's not your problem. So if you could have someone just bring you a seat to sit on, why wouldn't you? So yeah, it took a while. It took a while for the toilet to catch on. Has now, fortunately, for all concerned. We have got a 2,000-year-old hall unearthed in an Italian villa where a Roman emperor and knights once partied. We are told more than 2,000 years ago, Roman knights, merchants, and even emperors flocked to a small residential area near Naples, where they lived, relaxed, and partied. Now home to a famous archaeological site, Posillipo, if I pronounce that wrong, I apologise, has taught experts about ancient Roman life for years. And archaeologists from the Oriental, interesting word, University of Naples recently discovered a massive hall in what was once a famous villa. There's a Facebook post here from the school that's talking about it. The hall is made of white mosaic, and the floor's mosaic carpet has a double frame of black tiles. The hall is the latest in the university's excavation campaign. Once in this, a 2,000-year-old imperial villa that once belonged to the Roman Emperor Augustus. Augustus reigned from 31 BCE until his death in 14 CE, and he was the first Roman emperor. Remember for spearheading the transformation from republic to empire following the death of his great uncle, Julius Caesar. The villa's first owner, Publius, who is somebody who suggested news items for this, Publius Vado Polone was a rich merchant, knight, and politician who was close to Augustus. The two had a falling out, but when Polion died in 15 BCE, he left his villa to Augustus, who renamed the home and facilitated renovations of the building. During his residence at the villa, it was known for its famous parties. Augustus was often among the party guests. This site is now open to the public, flaunting a tunnel spanning nearly half a mile, ancient theatres and a temple. Posillipo is about 150 miles south of Rome, and it's still, quote, a top choice among the Neapolitan elite and its wealthy classes. So we're having some discussion about royal bottom wiping. And this is the Groom of the Stool question. I'm of the opinion that the Groom of the Stool did not wipe the monarch's bottom. That may be different when I think Henry VIII was more incapacitated. I think the bigger he got, it would have been more difficult for him to wipe his bottom. So it's possible that did happen. But what this person does is this person accompanies the monarch and helps them to use the toilet. And if you are in the skirts and clothing of a early modern queen, or for that matter, the doublet and hose of an early modern king, you need help dressing and undressing, mostly because you are covered in straight pins. You need some assistance to avoid you stabbing yourself potentially in some very uncomfortable positions. We have more Roman news. We've got the discovery of a Roman soldier's paycheck. This is excavations led by the Israel Antiquities Authority at Masada, and they have found a detailed military paycheck. It was issued to a Roman legionary soldier in around about AD 72. It's one of 14 Latin scrolls found at Masada by archaeologists, 13 of which were written on papyrus and one on parchment paper. It provides a detailed summary of the soldier's salary over 2 pay periods of the 3 that he would receive annually, including the various deductions that he was charged. He was deducted for boots, a linen tunic, and barley fodder for his horse. These details indicate that these deductions almost exceeded the soldier's salary. And while this document provides only a glimpse into a single soldier's expenses for a specific year, it's clear that in light of the nature and risks of the job, the soldiers did not stay in the army only for the salary. They may, we are told, have been able to loot on military campaign. And a possible suggestion arises from reviewing the different historical texts preserved in the IAA Dead Sea Scrolls Laboratory. A document discovered in the Cave of Letters at Nahal Hiver at the time of the Bar Kokhba revolt sheds light on some side hustles that Roman soldiers used to earn extra cash. The document in question is a loan deed signed between a Roman soldier and a Jewish resident. The soldier charging the resident with interest higher than what was legal. This document reinforces the understanding that Roman soldier salaries may have been augmented by additional sources of income, making service in the Roman army far more lucrative, which makes them sound a little bit like a protection racket or a gang. But I mean, same. We have an auction happening. A 1,000-year-old Bible that is thought will fetch at least or as much as $50 million at auction. This is the Codex Sassoon. And it's going to be auctioned by Sotheby's in May. The name Codex Sassoon comes from the Bible's previous ownership. It was part of the famed collection of David Solomon Sassoon, who assembled the most significant private collection of Judaica and Hebraica manuscripts in the 20th century. Before the Codex Sassoon, only fragments of biblical texts existed in scroll form. Sotheby's said that while the Bible held a prominent place in Sassoon's collection, it was only recently scientifically studied and carbon dated by the owner, whom Sotheby's declined to name. The carbon dating verified its dating to the 9th century, making it older than the Aleppo Codex and the Leningrad Codex, two other well-known early Hebrew Bibles. And Debbie, you ask a good question. Provenance. Don't know who the owner was. Sotheby's isn't saying. But of course, I'm sure Sotheby's will have done their due diligence. They tell us they always do, don't they? So come back later in the month, see what happens, I guess. There's the current viewing, there is no indication that it's there are questions about its provenance. Doesn't mean there won't be soon. Allegedly, don't sue me. I'm going to skip over this because it's getting sticky. We have the remains of a medieval religious hermit buried in an extremely unusual position. Has been found to have had syphilis. A medieval anchoress buried in an unusual crouched position at a church site in England is found to have died with syphilis and arthritis. They are asking questions about how a religious hermit could have acquired a sexually transmitted infection, but it might potentially explain her unusual burial position. The remains were unearthed in 2007 in York, and it's thought that these remains may belong to a woman called Lady Isabel German, who lived a life of seclusion inside a single room at the church during the 15th century. She was found tightly crouched together in a small room located behind the church's altar. This is, of course, a rarity for the burials at the time. Just hopping back, the Sassoon Bible is, to my knowledge, it's a Hebrew Bible, so it's in Hebrew. But the location of the skeleton in the app suggests this was a woman of high status. But the crouched burial position is extremely unusual for the medieval period. But it's thought that perhaps her positioning could have been caused by her arthritis. So essentially, she may have been locked up, and that's how they had to bury her, or because of the tight burial space that was allotted to her. It's also possible that she died in that position and rigor mortis set in before she could be buried. We are told she was living with septic arthritis and also advanced venereal syphilis. That would have meant that she lived with severe visible symptoms of infection affecting her entire body, and later on her neurological and mental health would have declined. The researchers did note the possibility that the single bone that exhibited syphilis, a part of the skull that set apart from the individual, may have come from a different skeleton whose remains were, quote, found on the opposite side of the cemetery site. However, they did find several lesions elsewhere on the skeleton that suggested syphilis. Lady German lived in a period of history where we typically think of there being a strong association between visible and disfiguring illnesses and sin, with that type of sin seen as punishment from God. While it's very tempting to suggest that someone with visible disfiguring disease would be shunned or want to commit to life as an anchoress as a way to hide from the world, the research has shown this might not be the case. Such severe disease could also have been viewed positively, being sent by God to grant martyr-like status to someone special. So yes, there's. I mean, she almost certainly would have been a secular person before she became a nun. Um, and yes, there are of course unpleasant ways that a person and unconsenting ways that a person can be infected with syphilis as well. Um, there has been some studies that counterbalance and counteract this, because there was the Columbus theory that basically that was the, the reward that Columbus and his men got from all of their nonsense, that they came back with syphilis and brought it to Europe. But more recently, remains found in European cemeteries have discounted that, because there are visible signs of syphilis in remains that far predate 1492. If she had been born with it, if it was congenital syphilis, my understanding is that you would see evidence on the teeth. So I would think that these researchers would potentially know that if she had congenital syphilis, because it would be visible in ridging on her teeth. Got some more ladies' remains. I'm seeing some wonderful comments coming in, but I'm also aware of the time, and I just want to click on to our next story. We have got evidence of trepanation on a medieval woman's skull, more than once as well. This is a woman who once lived in central Italy, and they found evidence that she experienced at least 2 brain surgeries consistent with the practice of trepanation. For those who don't know, they drill a hole in your head, and hopefully they don't hit brain. And clearly they didn't, because she survived 2 of them. This skull was excavated in the late 19th century, and it has been examined for this latest paper. It was found in a cemetery in central Italy that was being in use from the 6th to 8th centuries CE. Only 19 skulls found at the site were in good enough condition for study. This is one of them. And why would this woman have been subjected to not 1 but 2 invasive surgeries? Well, it suggested that she probably suffered from some kind of systemic condition. Her teeth showed signs of periodontal disease, with acute abscesses and severe molar wear associated with tooth loss. Her CT scans reveal potential signs of something called HFI, hyperostosis frontalis interna, a thickening of the inner sides of the skull's frontal bone. This condition is common apparently in menopausal women and is consistent with the skull's determined age. It often accompanies other conditions like seizures, headaches, obesity, and diabetes. A healed perforating trauma is also consistent with the thickening of the frontal bones, but such injuries are usually fatal, and this wasn't the case with this skull. So, alternatively, there could be a ritualistic rationale for the procedures. The Avar people who lived in the Carpathian Basin during this same time often used cranial scraping in this time. But the authors of this study note that the culture of the Longobard people of Castel Trocino was tightly intertwined with Byzantine culture. However, they found no evidence of a ritualistic practice of trepanation among the Longobard people. Is it possible that it's punishment? At least one Longobard law called for the cutting of the hair and the removing of the skull skin. So scalping, I'm seeing the word ritual purposes come up. I'm just reminding you, this is not a drinking game. It never will be. But this punishment is usually, we're told, reserved for soldiers who desert battle. The authors note they could not refine their diagnosis, given that an exhaustive examination of the full skeleton was not possible. There are, though, no lesions suggesting the presence of trauma, tumours, congenital diseases, or other pathologies. And moreover, although it's intriguing to consider the possibility of a ritual or judicial motive, no osteological or historical evidence supports such hypotheses. But what it does show is that somebody can survive a hole being drilled in their head. We had last time we had a thing found in the metro in Rome that was led to a display in the metro station, and we've got another one this time in Amsterdam. This is train tunnels beneath Amsterdam reveal a medieval treasure trove, and we can see this image with some of the displays. The fruits of subterranean labours of people excavating this can be seen at Rokin Station, one of 8 stops on the route and one that doubles as an impressive underground archaeological museum with nearly 10,000 artefacts on display. This is how you deal with artefacts that you find when you are doing necessary works on railways or for building. Make it into a museum display. People will come. It can always earn you money, or it can bring people from to the local area. So the cafes get money, etc. This station, we are told, well worth visiting in its own right, which definitely seems to be the case, is a testament not only to the rich heritage on which Amsterdam is built, but also the engineers and archaeologists who work so hard to preserve it. The fruits of their labour are displayed in 2 glass cases positioned between the escalators, one at either end of the station. On any given day, it's not unusual to find a commuter going up and down the escalators just to get a better look. And I think that this is absolutely incredible. This is the way to do it. When you make these kinds of discoveries, this is and there's another great picture of it here. Look at it. To enable people to engage with the Rokin displays at their leisure, an online database of nearly 20,000 objects below the surface was created. People say they thought it was food. Yes, it does look a little bit like it's laid out. It's so delicious. It's fitting. So you could, if you go to the linked article, you can click on below the surface and see great pictures of the items. So yes, Intrepid Fraidy Cat, you can indeed, and it's linked in the article. Check it out. There's also a documentary about the excavation and a coffee table book. So check it out. Marianne, I would miss my train. I would definitely miss my train. This is how you do it. This is how it should be done. Anybody who knows people or who sees people who work on these sites for new developments who don't want to talk about the history, this is how you make it part of the story that sells, essentially. We've got the discovery of a rare Inca tunic that has been unearthed in Chile. This was once worn by an Inca man and has been removed from a grave, according to a statement released by George Washington University. These uncus were made according to specifications imposed by imperial authorities. This uncle, however, also has features unique to the provincial region where it was found, hundreds of miles south of Cusco, the Inca capital. Quote, it represents a study of a rare example of an excavated Inca unco tunic, whose context and technical features are providing an unprecedented understanding of imperial Inca influence in the provinces. And there's also a link to, I'm seeing some, that's pretty pic. I see the dad joke. I like it. And there is a link to the scholarly article on this find that is in this article that you can find. It's really rare to find intact fabric evidence, and we are going to move on to some incredible intact fabric evidence and this is going to be one for you, Tea Lady Whimsy. Love textiles. Well then, buckle up, because you're about to see something that hold on to your hat that you are knitting, for it's, and you're knitting the sleeve of a pullover. Well then, buckle up, kids. Let's see what we've got. Boom. 17th century shipwreck. Absolute treasure trove of goods. This, we have here a This is a virtually intact silk satin dress with a woven floral motif. This is incredibly exciting. This is a ship from 1660 that sank in the North Sea. To have a yes, yep. So people are responding to this in much the same way that I feel. How did it survive? Good question. We have so little fabric evidence and so little clothing evidence from this time. So when we are reconstructing it, we are so heavily focused on paintings because it's really all we have. But now we can see how these fabrics have been woven. We can see how these have been stitched together. This is a big deal. But do you know what? You're all getting excited about this beautiful gown, but it wasn't the only item of clothing to survive the shipwreck. Wait, please, I beg of you, because there's also this bad boy. Look at it. This is a silk wedding dress interwoven with pieces of silver that was recovered from the same place as the other dress. But they are different sizes, suggesting that this might have been a chest covering clothes from a family. There were individual bits of silver woven into this wedding dress to make it sparkle. But wait, there is more. Look at it. 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 So we've got this velvet robe, it's being called, made of expensive red dye. Then we've also got a bodice. A bodice recovered from the garment chest with impressions of the whalebone that were used to shape it. And we also have this beautiful red silk case that used to house a woman's toiletry case. So a comb, a brush, a pincushion, and a mirror were still found inside. Their other finds include a beautiful cup, a binding for a book. Check out this news article. It is, oh boy, gorgeous. I love it. It's good times. On the case, it is it is embroidery. I can't see for sure, but it could be sort of silver embroidery. How do they make the red dye? Good question. I'm wondering if it's I'm not sure how they made this particular red dye. They didn't say, they just said expensive red dye. Certainly would have been, I'm assuming, imported. Yeah. I'm guessing it's one of these two, but they didn't specify which. But either way, it's spenny. It's very spenny. Thank you. Right, we're going to hop on because we have to motor on because time is a marching. Ruins of a 350-year-old castle destroyed by invaders have been unearthed in Panama. This is the castle of San Lorenzo El Real de Chagres. It was rebuilt 4 times, but archaeologists are interested in not the bit that's still standing, but in the version that was constructed before pirates destroyed it. They began excavating on the 10th of January, and portions of the 350-year-old version of the castle have begun to re-emerge. They have found a military structure, a castle moat, bastions, and also some stuff, cannonballs, pipes, smoking pipes, and other ceramic objects. This work is ongoing. They are looking for more than just castle ruins, because there was a small city of Chagres that was used to supply the castle in the 17th century, but this town was abandoned when the Panama Canal was built, and all the occupants were moved from Chagres to Nuevo Chagres in 1916. So they are hoping to find this old city or its remains. So this is going to be ongoing. The project at this Castel is a collaboration between Panamanian and Colombian researchers led by archaeologist Tomas Mendizabal per the release. So this is 50 miles northwest of Panama City. What killed the mummified Swiss woman? There's no picture on this because all of the pictures that were available were of human remains. This is an 18th century ancestor of Boris Johnson, but we won't hold that against her. She couldn't possibly have known. She had the hallmarks of syphilis. And people are asking if it could be pirates. I'm wondering if this is the ship sinking or the castle sinking. Because I think one of the castles was destroyed by pirates in the previous one. Anna Katharina Bischoff died at the age of 68 in 1787 and was buried beneath the floor of Basel's Barflusser Church, right in front of where the choir stands. But what really killed her? Was she really done in by syphilis, as scientists suggest? And this cause of death has been assumed due to damage to her bones and a high concentration of mercury that was discovered in many of her organs, bone lesions and mercury treatments being hallmarks of syphilitic infection. Which is welcome to Reading the Past. I've got to get a grip. Cool. We're close to the end. Okay. All right. So they found bone lesions and mercury treatments, which is usually connected to a diagnosis of syphilis at the time and the treatment for that. However, Mohammed Sahan of the research institution has said that this isn't what killed her. They have found no evidence of having syphilis bacteria when they were looking for pathogens. But what they did find was an infection in her brain by a bacterium previously unknown to science. I love the fact that they've been digging around in her skull cap. They have found a bacteria we didn't know about. I really hope they've not released that because we just don't need it. It belongs to a greater family of non-tubercular mycobacteria. Say that 3 times fast. And how she's infected is a mystery. These lesions on her skull, as well as the degeneration of her rib and leg bones, had been detected by previous computed tomography and historical analysis. In addition, toxicology analysis showed high levels of mercury in various body organs. Thus, it was suspected that she had died of syphilis or mercury poisoning, or alternatively and less provocatively, by misidentification or misdiagnosis in the Middle Ages of tuberculosis or Paget's disease, which causes skeletal deformations like those observed in her body. The presence of mercury probably explains her startling state of mummification. And as I said, the human remains are visible, and it is a startling state of mummification. If the liquid metal had any effect beyond making her sick, it would have made the bacteria responsible for decay sick too, slowing her putrefaction. What I will say is that the mercury treatment does make people lose their minds. That's why they get the phrase mad as a hatter, because they would use mercury to put a high shine on a hat. So if you give someone mercury, they will present as mentally ill. And of course, tertiary stage syphilis also creates a syphilitic dementia. So you become mentally ill. So the treatment for the illness that makes you mentally unstable also makes you mentally unstable. So there we go. We have got a find at Harriet Tubman's birthplace. Archaeologists in Maryland have uncovered African religious artifacts on the eastern shore where Harriet Tubman was born into slavery in 1822. The artifacts were found in the ruins of an enslaved overseer's house, possibly Jerry Minoki, which is not far from the home of Ben Ross, who is Harriet Tubman's father. Both buildings were on the land of the enslaver Anthony Thompson. The items found have been identified as a West African cache it's got items like glass to reflect spirits. It's got a round button, red and blue items, and metal nails. Governor Moore said that Harriet Tubman's birthplace is sacred ground, and this discovery is part of our ongoing commitment to preserve the legacy of those who lived here. The find reveals untold stories of the past that help us both better understand the history we share and inspire us to make a better future. Beneath layers of soil, archaeologists uncovered a substantial brick building foundation of the home. The excavation revealed hundreds of artifacts, including the West African spirit cache. The cache found during excavations last year included a glass heart-shaped perfume bottle stopper, a white ceramic dish, and a copper alloy button. Enslaved people are believed to have placed the cache in front of the home's fireplace to protect the occupants from negative spirits. Questions about why Harriet Tubman is not on the $20 bill. Is this a conversation that's based upon this was supposed to have happened? Because it feels appropriate. I hope that it does happen. We are continuing on. We have another interconnected story from around the same period. A family who have bought the Sharswood plantation have discovered that their ancestors were enslaved there. We hear that in 2021, Frederick Miller was looking for a house to host family events and reunions. His sister convinced him to buy this home just up the road from their mother's house. They say we often pass the house probably several times a day, so just think of how many millions of times we passed this property and never really wondered what it was. We just knew it was a big old house. Little did they know they would soon be holding the key to the big old house and unlocking the history of their enslaved Miller ancestors. They went to a historian to find out about it. This historian started doing the research, and what they found was that there were work contracts between their family members from the enslavers after emancipation. They point out that the formerly enslaved sometimes couldn't move on. You've been here your whole life. A lot of people hadn't been outside or off the lands of the plantation. So now it's like, how am I going to feed my family? So they stay on as sharecroppers. And that's where we have the labour contract between Nathaniel Crenshaw Miller and at least 10 of the people that he enslaved. Among these 10 slaves were David and Violet Miller, the great-great-grandparents of the new homeowners, enslaved and married on the same property that he now owned. They plan to host their second annual Juneteenth celebration on the property on June 18th. And the big old house on Riceville Road will now welcome anyone to discover the history of Sharswood. The owner says, it means a lot to me because I know that I can do something different with it. I want it to be a place that's open, a welcoming kind of place. I don't want it to be a place where you feel like I drive up and just can't go there. You can go there. You can come to Sharswood. And if you'd like to learn more about Sharswood or donate to their GoFundMe, then do check out the article, because you will see there's a link to the sharswoodfoundation.com where they have got a GoFundMe. And it sounds like they are going to be keeping that history alive in really important and clear interpretive ways. A shipwreck carrying a cargo of Victorian property has been granted protection. This ship went down in the winter of 1856, carrying a cargo of rare ceramics. It set off from the coast of Kent and then sank, losing, of the 44 members and 66 passengers, 70 people, including the ship's captain, lost their lives. The ship broke up into two pieces and set on the seabed 75 feet below. The wreck remained untouched for 150 years before a Kent diving club found and identified it in 2018. Now, the UK's Department for Culture, Media and Sport has granted special protection to the ship. The recreational divers can still approach the wreck, but the contents are to remain undisturbed. It was a medium-sized wooden sailing ship, usually used to transport both passengers and goods between Europe, North America, Australia, and New Zealand during the 18th and 19th century. This one was carrying British emigrants and pottery. It was on a second round trip voyage to New Zealand when it sank. And we have got some great pictures of the kinds of things. We learn that the overseas market is tremendously important for pottery manufacturers. And so the things that they're sending out there are examples on this ship that were fairly mass produced, but they didn't survive apart from under the water. So many of the wrecks well-preserved ceramics, some of which are still in their original crates, display previously unknown patterns that have no equivalents in today's museum collections. Others are complete examples of patterns only known from discarded pottery damaged during the firing process. Experts do hope that these rare finds will offer insight into Victorian life. The ceramics, we are told, are both ordinary and special. Not only do they help shine a light on Victorian industry and trade and the lives of immigrants, but they also help fill important gaps in the collections that those museums preserve and display for us. I've got some great comments coming in. I'm just going to, yes, underwater museum. Somebody asked if they're planning to open up the previous house site to archaeologists. I don't know. I wonder if they will. If approached, they might be very happy to let that happen. This is yes, and people asking, oh yes, I hope they sell replicas. That would be cool. The thing is, this stuff is marketable, isn't it? I think it's cool. Let's hop on. We are coming to the last article in our new news, and this is about 5 archaeological museums in Greece that have closed to protest a new law that would put them in government control. And speaking as somebody who lives in a place where some of our national museums, as we've discussed a lot today, the British Museum and others, if you walk into a free museum in this country, it's almost certainly funded by the British government. It gets its funding through the Department for Culture, Media and Digital Culture, Media and Sport. It's now called DCMS, Digital Cultural Media and Sport. And in recent years, I have heard from reliable sources, who I will not name, that pressure has been applied from individuals from the Department for Culture, Media and Sport in this country onto museums so that their holdings, their collections and their exhibitions present narratives that are pleasing to the government, the wider government. So it doesn't talk about things that the government doesn't want to talk about. So they are essentially putting pressure to shape a narrative frequently that covers up or whitewashes, and I've used that word deliberately, the problems and the conversations about colonialism that are happening elsewhere. So there's what these museums are doing. As somebody who is seeing the effect of government interference, a handful of high-profile museums in Greece have closed to the public in recent days. The bill was introduced last month. It designates 5 of the country's largest archaeological museums as legal entities under public law. These institutions will no longer be overseen by the Cultural Ministry, but will instead operate semi-autonomously under government-appointed boards. Although this law ostensibly gives the museums more power, opponents say it will do the opposite, establishing an oligarchical power structure. The National Archaeological Museum, the Archaeological Museum of Thessaloniki, the Archaeological Museum of Heraklion, and the Byzantine and Christian Museum and the Museum of Byzantine Culture are the ones that will be impacted by this bill. All 5 closed on Monday. More than 1,000 workers marched before Parliament. They say, the association of these museums says, the cultural history is our common property. We do not give it to the elite of the respective government. Public museums belong to us all. Sorry, it's jumped a bit. Poor pink paint on the truth is, I definitely see why I used it because of its loading. I think that is, it's intentional. Pink paint is also, I think, a very good way of putting it. And I think that the thing is that when Parliament become involved, history is always political. I'm not going to deny that, but making it objectively political in this way is resist at all costs, is my advice. This new law has been at the centre of a fierce political debate. Critics say the clause could threaten Greece's ongoing efforts to have the Parthenon marbles repatriated from England. Once again, culture and the people of culture are under persecution. Lena Mindoni, head of the Cultural Ministry, has persistently defended the law since it was announced by her agency. She says modernisation is not a phase or stage of development, it's an ongoing social process. After 150 years, we dare to make changes. I will repeat for the umpteenth time, the position of the Greek government regarding the Parthenon sculptures is that it doesn't recognise jurisdiction, possession and ownership in the British Museum. She went on to say that the state considers them to be stolen goods. So I think the thing is that because Greece is doing this high profile thing of pressuring for the return of the Parthenon marbles, rightly so, if/when they are returned, they become a political hot potato that can be weaponized for good and for bad. And so I understand why politically they want to have control of the museums and the narratives and that are shaped around the return of this and indeed other artifacts. However, the desires of the political parties to shape that narrative in really overt ways is a problem, I think. So I agree. I fully, wholeheartedly support the closure of these museums, and I hope it gets. Even if, with the best intentions, that government doesn't intend to do it, by doing it, you leave the door open for people who do have nefarious intent. So that is the end of our new news. We are hopping into events and exhibitions. Let's do it now. As last week, when I was kindly, and the week before, when I was kindly pointed out that I should be including accessibility information on both the Opera Pinboard beside all of these exhibition informations and also in the description box when it goes up next to the exhibition link, there will be accessibility information. In most cases, the exhibitions we're going to talk about do have accessibility that looks fairly robust. There is one, the second one we're going to look at, where I couldn't really understand what was going on, but that may be because there was a language divide. I was reading the website in translation, so I don't know if I just couldn't find it properly. We have a rich man, poor man, art, class and commerce in a late medieval town. This is at the Met Museum, and it's running from March the 6th until August the 20th this year. And this is looking at the objects that connect between these class divides. Between the monarch, nobility and landowning gentry in the highly stratified society of 16th century England, below the monarch, nobility and landowning gentry stood those known as the middling sort. This exhibition examines the emergence of a distinctly middle-class taste in late medieval England, showcasing a rare set of large-scale domestic sculptures from Exeter. It's got over 50 works, including textiles, prints, furnishings, and other decorative arts. Rich Man, Poor Man explores why the commissioner of these pieces may have been drawn to such imagery. It also highlights how the home, both inside and out, could serve as a form of individual self-expression and a statement of social order. This is coming right back to one of the seminal texts in Renaissance studies, Renaissance self-fashioning. This development of this middle class, this middling sort. This is the one where I couldn't find the information about accessibility, but I was reading this in translation. So we have the Gamelda Gallery, which is doing a retrospective or display of the works of Hugo van der Goes. And my understanding is that there's just an enormous collection of these works, and the exhibition is entitled Between Pain and Bliss, and it is opening on the 31st of March, and it runs to the 16th of July. It runs to the 16th of July, if that's what 07 means. So there we go. Oh, hang on. What's this? The Tudors, Art and Majesties in Renaissance England, running until... Is this the Cleveland? You're saying this is the Cleveland Museum of Art? Has this exhibition transferred? If this exhibition is transferred, I will talk about it next week. Wonderful, because I was talking about it loads when it was at the Met. Lovely. Okay, this is one for my London friends. This is at Kensington Palace, Crown to Couture. Discover how the trailblazing fashion of the 18th century nobility has inspired today's iconic look. The subtitle to this exhibition is From Charles II to Lizzo and Lady Gaga. I think it looks incredible. It's on from the 5th of April 2023 until the 29th of October 2023. That is at Kensington Palace. If you are over in the UK, if you're over in London and you are planning on going to Kensington Palace to check out this exhibition, if you are indeed looking to go to Kensington Palace and you perhaps also want to go to some of the other sites that are HRP, which is Hampton Court, Tower of London, Kew, and the Banqueting House in London, and they also have Hillsborough Castle over in Ireland. If you are interested in this, then I recommend looking into a membership because it probably will work out cheaper if you want to go to particularly more than one or two of the sites. So I think this looks really cool. I'm going to see if I can check it out. The Ashmolean has an exhibition called Labyrinth, Knossos, Myth and Reality. This is closing much sooner. This is closing on the 30th of July 2023. So this is objects and text, looking at the notion of the labyrinth and those mythologies surrounding it. So worth checking out. We've got one here for Minnesota. The Minnesota Historical Center, the Minnesota Historical Society has Sherlock Holmes, the exhibition. This is going to be running until April the 2nd, 2023. The tagline looks fun. The game is afoot, but all is not what it seems. Step into Victorian London and test your powers of observation as you work alongside the world's most iconic detective. Last, but by no means least, some of you may have seen that I was doing a Speaker's Corner event week before last, where I was interpreting as Christabel Pankhurst. Well, it has now been added to the Royal Parks YouTube channel. It's up there. It's 53 minutes. It's there. It will be linked in. I made a post about it on my community tab on YouTube. I will be also linking it, of course, in the description box and on the Opera tab. So if you want to see me pretending to be Christabel Pankhurst and also answering questions in the Q&A, then check that out. See what you think. I hope you enjoy it. If you do watch it, I had a really good time making it, working with the Royal Parks and also with my wonderful friends at Zoom Through History, Nadia and Josh, who if you're an educator and you're looking for historical characters to come visit you over Zoom, then do check out their stuff on Zoom Through History. You will recognize them if you have watched Monarchs Anonymous, because they are our Victoria and Albert and our Edward and Wallace, and they are also the creators of the sitcom as a whole. So that is, thank you. That's very kind. I had such a good time doing it. That's really nice of you. Thank you. Yes, Christabel Pankhurst is not without her problems, but she was very good fun to play. So let us wind this down. We have been going for longer than ever. I'm not getting better at being concise, but I've had a great time with you all, and I hope you've enjoyed this too. And I will see you on Friday. We are going to be going, I believe, I'm going to be at home, so I will be seeing you at 4 p.m. for the live chat, 4 p.m. GMT. And then, of course, as I'm already getting news articles coming in, we will be back, barring some catastrophe, we'll be back on Monday at 8:30. Also, if you want to check us out on History After Dark, that happens on a Wednesday at 8:15 GMT. If you haven't already, please make sure you have liked this video. Please subscribe, hit the bell, make sure you have selected all so that you see my notifications allegedly. And until we meet again, dear friends, thank you all so much for taking the time to hang out with me. It does really mean the world. And I will speak to you all in my next video. But do take care of yourselves. And from me, it is bye-bye.